Burlington peace activist dub Bernie Sanders Bomber Bernie. Why did they dub him Bomber Bernie? Well, it had to do with the F-35, which cost $1.4 trillion. Supposedly, it's going to be obsolete as soon as they finish constructing it. $1.4 trillion for an aircraft that is totally obsolete. That's useless. Bomber Bernie. So he was in favor of the regime change in Iraq. He was in favor of regime change in Libya. He was in favor of regime change, not just regime change, but all-out war in Somalia and in the Balkans. So these neoliberal disasters are these humanitarian interventions. And these humanitarian interventions, unfortunately, have to be completely costless. And that's why the Somalian War was an absolute disaster, the worst disaster, military defeat since Vietnam. So Mogadishu. 1993, Bernie Sanders voted to put ground troops into Somalia. Ground troops. This is the Black Hawk Down War, or more precisely the two Sikorsky UH-60 Black Hawks Down War. There was two Black Hawks that went down. These military helicopters, two Sikorsky UH-60 Black Hawks. And the Somalian War that happened under Clinton. Remember Mogadishu? Remember Dan Rather trying to pronounce Mogadishu? I was 93, so I would have been 11 years old. Now, the military-industrial complex was testing the emerging doctrine of humanitarian intervention. And Noam Chomsky said about the Somalian War, it was largely a PR operation for the Pentagon. In fact, scarcely disguised. One hopes that the Somalian War will do more good than it will harm them in the long run. If so, that's incidental. Basically, they're props for photo opportunities. That's what Noam Chomsky said about Somalia. So August 1992 to March 1994 was America's involvement. Eventually, the UN peacekeepers would get out in 95. So for 3 years, you had a foreign occupation in Somalia. It had started out, though, as a UN peacekeeping mission where they were giving food to the starving Somalis. So eventually, the Somalis were happy. They greeted them. They were all excited, happy to be saved from starvation. But slowly but surely, the U.S. troops were drawn slowly into inter-clan power struggles and ill-defined nation-building missions. Isn't that how it always happens? Vietnam, right? Slowly but surely under Truman, Eisenhower, then LBJ was just like, fuck it, just, balls to the... People woke up one day in early October 1993 to news reports of dozens of American soldiers being killed or wounded in fierce fighting in the streets of the capital of Somalia, Mogadishu. The events of October 3rd to the 4th, 1993, are more startling when Americans reacted to the spectacle of dead U.S. soldiers being dragged through the streets by cheering Somali mobs. They were happy at first. Now they can't wait for the Americans to be killed and dragged through the street. So the Somalian War was 92 to 95. In May 1993, Bernie Sanders voted for the use of ground troops in Somalia. He was in favor of boots-on-the-ground invasion. In May 1993, he voted for the U.S. troops in Somalia. It was called the Authorization for Use of U.S. Armed Forces in Somalia. I think he was fooled by the title, right? Authorization for the use of U.S. Armed Forces in Somalia. That's pretty clear, cut and dry. The House had voted up 213 to 153, probably divided on partisan lines, but still. 153 representatives in the House voted against it. 153 representatives in the House of Representatives were against the war in Somalia. They were against it, but Bernie Sanders was for it. He wanted this war. So there was two, Black Hawk Downs, two UH-60 Black Hawks, right? And there was a third one that barely got back to the base, and then eventually it crashed. There's a famous movie, Black Hawk Down, which I haven't seen. I probably should. But it's propaganda. They made the guy that the Americans were targeting into like a Hitler-like creature. But now that we're fighting terrorism in Somalia today, that same Hitler-like man would be the man who would help us fight the terror. Overall damage was $2 billion. So for $2 billion, what did we gain, right? We lost. Whatever we were trying to do in Somalia, we lost. First, it was giving out food. We were loved, and everybody loved us. But then we started to get into the conflict, and then started killing civilians, and then that kind of turned people against us. There was about 10,000 people that were killed in the ground war for Mogadishu before the one-day battle, the Battle of Mogadishu, in early October 1993. So there was 10,000 that was killed beforehand, and then this one-day battle is going to have 60 to 500 Somalis being killed. This is the Battle of Mogadishu. 19 Americans died in the Battle of Mogadishu, one Pakistan ally and one Malaysian ally, and then, of course, the Black Hawks were shot down. So in terms of body count, this only the one battle. I don't know the Americans. I only got an estimation for the earlier years. By the numbers that I know, 10,000 were killed beforehand, 500 were killed during the Battle of Mogadishu, and 19 Americans, one Pakistan ally, one Malaysian ally, right? Because Pakistan was fighting alongside of us in these United Nations peacekeeping mission, this humanitarian peacekeeping mission. So it cost us $2 billion. There's 10,000 Somalis, over 10,000 Somalis were killed, and 19 Americans, one Pakistan ally, one Malaysian ally in the actual battle. So there could be more Americans who were killed throughout the entire war. So to begin with this war, it actually started with 1,800 United States Marines arriving on December 9th, 1992. The outgoing President Papa Bush, George H.W. Bush, sent the Marines to Mogadishu to restore hope. So Papa Bush is the one who actually sent the Marines into Somalia to begin with. So Papa Bush goes ahead and sends 1,800 Marines into Mogadishu December 9th, 1992. Okay, so backed by the U.S. troops, you had the United Nations international aid workers were able to restore food distribution, other humanitarian aid operations. An independent review by the U.S. Refugee Policy Group concluded that the operation only saved about 10 to 25,000 lives instead of the 2 million that was advertised. Still, 10,000 Somalians were saved, and then we killed 10,000, so I guess that evens it out, right? If we do good, we have to, destroy whatever good that we actually did. The sporadic violence continued. The murder of 24 United Nations soldiers from Pakistan in 1993, you had 24 Pakistanis who was our allies, who was our friends at the time. Now we're bombing Pakistan, but at one time, 24 Pakistani United Nations soldier allies were killed, and we were, enraged about it, and we wanted to, enact punishment, and then this is where it gets all fucked up. So as a result of the 24 UN soldiers who were killed in 93, the United Nations had authorized the arrest of General Muhammad Farah Aidid. General Muhammad. Okay, so they never caught him, but he was the leader of one of the rebel clans. On October 3rd, 1993, they were going to go arrest General Muhammad. During an attempt to make the arrest, rebels shot down 2 of the Black Hawk helicopters, killed 18 American soldiers. Footage of the Somalis dragging the body of one of the dead soldiers through the streets of Mogadishu amidst to a bunch of cheering. President Clinton immediately gave the order for all American soldiers to withdraw from Somalia by March 31st, 1994. Other Western nations followed suit. When the last UN peacekeepers left in 1995, eventually the mission had lost and cost about $2 billion. Now there's a shit ton of war crimes, right? With every war, war is hell. Well, that's the whole point about war crimes, is that everything and anything is not okay. There is some restrictions when it comes to war, okay? If we're the good people, then we can't go around murdering kids and raping and, okay, so let's look at the Belgian troops, okay? So the Belgian troops were stationed in Kismayo. Without provocation, they harassed, beat, and killed many Somalis. Many of them were unarmed. Speaking anonymously, Belgian soldiers were frank. If someone had been killed, you just left them there. In the end, all you thought about was the red tape it would cause to report it. At the very end, we would just shoot at them straight away. Another soldier described how inflicting pain became part of their everyday life. There are some really funny things. I saw a guy putting a metal necklace around the neck of a Somali kid. It wasn't hurting him, but he couldn't get out of it. And then six Somalis tried to pull him out of it, and they couldn't. They simply just couldn't pull him out. So yes, we did have a laugh. This kid wasn't really in pain because of that piece of metal, but he wasn't thrilled at the idea that he would have to run around for the rest of his life with this piece of metal around his neck. Other cases included locking children in metal containers. One boy died from heat exhaustion and suffocation, dragging people behind tanks, throwing children into the Java River, and, other instances that are just as disgusting. The sexual in the American soldier being drugged through the streets of Mogadishu during the Battle of Mogadishu was probably horrific for Americans, as it should be. But what about when the Belgians were dragging people behind the tanks? What about when they were suffocating this boy or throwing children into the Java River? And then the sexual aggression of the paratroopers also caused concern in Kismayo. There's also a photograph of two Belgian paratroopers right here. So the photograph of the two Belgian paratroopers, they're holding a Somali boy over a burning fire. And they were swinging him back and forth like, ha ha ha, we're just picking on you, ha ha ha. Eventually those two were acquitted on the technicality that the Somali boy had not come forward and filed a complaint. In May 1998, the Belgian courts belatedly showed some resolution when the sentence on a paratrooper accused of forcing a Somali girl. May 1998, so eventually, 3 years later, there's some justice for this Somali girl who was forced to perform a strip show. He got a sentence of 3 months, and then it was extended to 1 year after an appeal from the prosecution. He had offered the girl to one of his colleagues as a birthday present. The judge accepted that Sergeant Dirk Nassel had been motivated by racism, but he could not convict him of torture and sexual abuse because the victims had not come forward to testify. Prosecutors are also investigating the case of another paratrooper photographed urinating on the corpse of a Somali boy inside the battalion's base camp. So that's fucked up, right? Pissing on a dead boy, a dead child, pissing on him. A total of 4 cases of killing by the Canadians led to 2 cases of criminal charges. By contrast, several hundred cases of killings by the Belgian troops have yet to lead to a single conviction. In hospitals is a war crime. Attacking schools is a war crime. The whole point of the hospital is a neutral zone, so, injured people go in. But if, let's say the enemy does take the hospital over and they put snipers on top of the rooftops. Well, what you have to do now is give some warning to the civilians that are inside the building that an attack is about to happen. Some kind of warning. You can't, there's a few snipers on top of a building, so you just shoot up the entire building. The entire building is being shot up. So this was by a combined UN force that did this with U.S. helicopters. You had the Moroccan and the French and the Italian ground forces. They wanted to overrun ADID's, General Mohammed's headquarters in South Mogadishu. They ran into much fiercer resistance than they had expected, and the Moroccans in particular suffered heavy losses. For a while, the UN force commanders suspected that General ADID had taken refuge in Digfir Hospital. They thought that General Mohammed taken refuge in the Digfir Hospital, which is Mogadishu's largest hospital, which is about half a mile away from General Mohammed's headquarters. Under the Geneva Conventions, a hospital should be protected. But instead of giving it any warning, they just shot, a few snipers on the roof, and they just shot at the crowded hospital. It's no justification for firing heavy artillery and anti-tank missiles into the fabric of the building without warning. 380 patients were in the hospital, and then there was 230 hospital staff, including 19 doctors. Dr. Always Abdi Omar was operating on a woman admitted with a bullet wound in her abdomen when the entire building shook with the force of explosives. He says, and I quote, "I was conducting an exploratory laparotomy on one of the patients who had been brought in a bullet wound. I heard someone say that the Moroccans were coming up the road from Benadir and the militia were at the crossroads in front of Digfir. Just after that, I heard the first missile explosion. The staff started to run to flee to the basement. I continued my operation. I had to stay with the patient, but I could do nothing without the other staff. I was crying. I don't know where that missile hit, but I could feel the vibrations. Windows were breaking. A light fell from the ceiling. Then there were some explosions, and staff came and said that 3 patients in the recovery room had been killed." People were running. I finished the operation and stitched up the woman and put her in the ward. There was no one to take care of her. All in all, 11 artillery shells and helicopter rockets struck the hospital. One missile hit the operating theater, passing over the head of a doctor as a patient was being prepared for an operation. 4 missiles hit the orthopedic ward, killing at least 2 people. French troops ransacked and robbed the hospital later on. So shooting at that hospital in Digfir and killing 5 civilians, they're war crimes. Those are war crimes. So they were not, saving the country. They were just attacking the people of Somalia. And here's another war crime. So you had a bunch of clan elders, intellectuals, and poets. They were at the house of a self-styled defense minister, but it included Haber Gitter. Haber Gitter is the clan that General Mohammed controls. So Haber Gitter members were there, and they planned to argue against Adid's anti-UN stance. Indeed, the meeting had been called to consider a peace initiative, a peace meeting. Instead, as reported by the Washington Post Keith Richburg, it was a slaughter. Half a dozen Cobras pumped 16 tow missiles and 2,000 rounds of cannon fire into the house with deadly slaughter. A half a dozen Cobras pumped 16 tow missiles and 2,000 rounds of cannon fire into the house with deadly accuracy. First, they blew away the stairwell to prevent anyone from escaping. A video taken just after the attack showed the mangled bodies literally blown apart in the attack. The religious leaders, the elders, even the women in their colorful wrap dresses who were always on hand to serve the tea. That's who we killed. Somali crowds enraged by the attack immediately turned on 4 Western journalists who had gone to cover it, and they killed them. The July 12th, 1993 massacre caused the entire Haber Gitter clan and some other clans to rally behind General Mohammed. That's why the Somali people were dragging the bodies and attacking the Black Hawk Downs even though we were saving them. This is the reason. This is the reason. When you kill innocent women and children, it pisses people off. There's a bloody battle in September and women and children were killed. Apparently this disturbed President Clinton, who launched a muddled peace initiative designed to somehow include General Mohammed in the negotiations. On July 12th, U.S. helicopters fired 10 tow rockets into a building where members of General Mohammed's political movement was holding a meeting. Again, a peace meeting. And there was poets there and elders and women and children. And no General Mohammed, he wasn't there. At least 54 people and up to 73 civilians were killed, including the elders and religious people. So this is in the house of Abdi Kabdeed, which is one of General Mohammed's aides. When the journalists arrived to cover the event, an angry crowd turned on them and killed the 4. So there is no doubt that the U.S. helicopters attacked a chiefly civilian meeting. So unlike the hospital that was blown up, or that was attacked, there was 5 people that was mentioned that was killed in the Digfir hospital. But then when it comes to this, peace meeting, they were getting together to try to stop the war. This is when the American troops or the helicopters killed them. You had, 54 to 73 who were killed. So 70 dead civilians. It's war crimes. Shooting at hospitals, killing innocent people in hospitals, that's war crimes. Taking boys and throwing them into the lake and suffocating them, these are war crimes. You can't do that. What the hell does that, how does that help with your mission? U.S. helicopters fired off no fewer than 50,000 Alpha 165 and 63 rockets on October 3rd, 1993. October 3rd, 1993 is the Battle of Mogadishu. In the course of the battle near the Olympic Hotel in Mogadishu, this is where 18 U.S. soldiers are going to be killed and then one's going to be captured. The October 3rd battle had a picture of the dead U.S. pilot who was being dragged through the streets by a jeering crowd and the plight of another taken prisoner of war, hostage, as Bill Clinton said, and that forced a truce and a United States withdrawal. So I actually give props to Clinton for that, for pulling out. He didn't get stuck in Somalia like America had got stuck in Vietnam. There were 2 distinct phases with the U.S. and UN involvement in Somalia. Phase 1, the humanitarian phase, it used enough military force to allow food deliveries, which probably prevented 10 to 20,000 people from starving to death. But then they went above and beyond. Ambassador for America, Madeleine Albright, said that after the humanitarian food delivering phase was over, then they went in to try to build nations. They went for nation building, an unprecedented enterprise aimed at nothing less than the restoration of an entire country. That's what Madeleine Albright had described it as. So eventually all the U.S. troops leave the country in March 1994. This is a total debacle, right? The two crashed Black Hawk down airplanes in Somalia in 94. Remember that, because that was the climax, and that's when we lost. So the Battle of Mogadishu, a boots-on-the-ground invasion, and this is something that Bernie Sanders had voted for. Bernie Sanders voted for this. 153 people in the House voted against it. So it wasn't unanimous. He didn't have all that pressure. He just wanted to play the killing of 10,000 people for the ground war for Mogadishu, then the 500 Somalis who were killed in the Battle of Mogadishu, October 3rd, 1993. And then the 19 Americans were killed. And for what? For what? So the two Black Hawk Downs in Somalia, as you should remember, the mission was to capture General Muhammad. He was the main enemy, General Muhammad. But we didn't want to kill hundreds of people. And as the film of Black Hawk Down makes graphically clear, the mission was to capture this General Muhammad without killing, hundreds of people. But the film Black Hawk Down does show this. It does show that it was kind of a pointless endeavor. Some people say it was more successful. Others say that it was a bigger loss. But there was hundreds of people were killed in the Battle of Mogadishu when we were just trying to go after the one clan. Or we went in hearts and minds when we were killing hundreds. And so, yeah, body count, right, only 19 Americans died, but 500 Somalis. But how many of them were innocent? How many of them were, just civilians who just got caught in the crosshairs, who was trying to dodge one war tribe and another clan, and then all of a sudden, they got it from the Americans. So phase 2 of the Somali mission was rapidly approaching to destroy the village in order to save it. Well, we got to save it, so we have to nuke this entire place. Well, that's not going to save shit. Only maybe your ego? Is that what we're doing with raising somebody up as a god, or dropping somebody down as a kind of devil? The movie had portrayed General Muhammad as Hitler. He was just shooting peacekeepers, giving out food, and he was just a whole, just a total shithead. He was just a total shithead. That's who General Muhammad was in Black Hawk Down. But now we're fighting this war, war on terror in Somalia. We're bombing Somalia still today. So this isn't just, and we keep financing it, right? So all the senators and the president, they are all engaged in war still today. He would have been the man that they would actually go to if they were in, working in cooperation in conjunction with one another. He would be the man that they would have actually had to go to in order to fight the terrorists. So by using propaganda, we actually elevated, a man who could have been our friend later on. I just want to, wrap all this up in a nice, neat bow. And what we have here is a failure to communicate. We have $2 billion that was wasted. $2 billion, 10,000 dead Somalis, 500 dead Somalis. And what did we gain? What did we get out of any of this? And when we, make bad people and then turn them bad, then we have to be their friends later on. The opposite is true. When we say Bernie Sanders is an angel and he could do no wrong, the 153 House representatives, whether it was a partisan maneuver or not, they're heroes. You had 153 House of Representatives that stood opposed to any of these war crimes, to intervening, to getting involved in any of this. And as much as I'd like to trust the government to go do some good humanitarian, sort of mission, look how this thing just was fucked up. Papa Bush started it anyways, and, maybe just to